Tanya for the 28th of Kislev refers to story. Rabbi Yitzchak Meir of Ger had many people that had come to visit him, and one particular time there was a massive crowd, and Rebbunim, the shamash of the Rebbe of Ger, the Gerrer Rebbe, was overwhelmed. People were screaming and shouting, they all wanted to come in, and there was one person who really wouldn't take notice of the decorum that he was trying to place down, and he came to Rebbunim and he slapped Rebbunim across the face. And Rebbunim was very upset, and he ran into the Gerrer Rebbe and he said, if I serve you so faithfully, why did I deserve to be slapped across the face? And he didn't give the name of the person that did it. And meanwhile, the Chassidim started taking their turns to go in, and then the person who had slapped Rebbunim walks in for his turn. And the Rebbe asked him, why did you do it? And the man was alarmed and he was shocked, and he was also regretting his decision, but at the same time he had come because he was childless. He'd been waiting for children for a very long time. He hadn't had children, and he said that he's very bitter, he's had a very hard time, and the Rebbe told him that he's not going to hear anything he has to say until he comes in with the Rebbunim, and the Rebbunim forgives him. So he goes out, and a short while later they both come in, and the Gerrer Rebbe asks Rebbunim, do you forgive him? What's the conclusion? And Rebbunim says, I don't forgive him. And the Gerrer Rebbe says, why not? And he says, I only forgive him on one condition. And the Gerrer Rebbe asks, what's the condition? He says, if you promise him a child, I'll forgive him. And shortly after, the man was blessed with a child. The Tanya so far is in the middle of chapter 4. Chapter 1 dealt with questions, then we dealt with the animal soul. Chapter 2 we started talking about the fact that the godly soul is blown into us and it comes from deep within God. Then we started speaking chapter 3 about the 10 levels within the 3 parts of the godly soul. And the fact that the intellectual levels and emotional levels, the intellectual levels give birth to the emotional levels. And we talked about Das. And in chapter 4, we started talking about the garments of the soul. Yesterday, we spoke about the garments of the soul, and we spoke about the fact that the thought, the speech, and the action express the soul, and that love is the positive mitzvahs and fear is the negative mitzvahs. And then today, we have a very big twist, because we've been using the terminology of thought, speech, and action as garments of the soul. And we imagine, like when a person wears his garments as a person who's the primary, most important part of the story, and then the garments that he wears are not very important. You could switch them for other clothes, and even then, no one's going to say a person is the clothes they're wearing. Yeah, it's a person, and he happens to be wearing such and such clothes. What we'll discover in today's Tanya is, although we're using the terminology garments, it turns out that the garments are far, far infinitely greater than the person themselves. And that creates a very interesting situation. The Tanya. These 3 garments of Torah mitzvahs. Remember, we're talking about the godly soul. So it's the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action as they pertain to Torah mitzvahs connected to Hashem. Even though they're called garments of the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, they're called garments of the soul, which make it sound like they're very unimportant. Im kol zeh, nonetheless, gavha v'godla ma'alosam la'ein ketz asif al mailas nefesh ruach neshama atzman. They are far greater and infinitely higher than the soul themselves, than the levels of the soul. So we have the soul, the godly soul. The godly soul has 3 levels: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. They're tremendously high and elevated, and yet the garments of the soul are far, far higher and far greater. Like it's written in the Zayah, that Hashem and Hashem's Torah is entirely one. So you have the soul which comes from Hashem, which is very, very high. But then you have Torah and mitzvahs, which are bound infinitely so with God. Pirush, Torah is the will and wisdom of Hashem, and Hashem and His honor, or Hashem and His will and knowledge, they're absolutely united. In chapter 2, we already explained about Hashem and His wisdom. Hashem, His intelligence, and His knowing of His intelligence are all absolutely one. Therefore, Hashem and His wisdom are one. Therefore, Hashem and Torah is one. And therefore, the act of learning Torah unites a person to a far greater degree with Hashem than the person has naturally with his soul. Now you have a problem because we're just describing Torah as being unlimited, and we're describing the Torah as being united with Hashem, and Hashem is unlimited. So Hashem, even though we call Hashem unlimited, and no person can fathom and can understand Hashem's greatness, and no one can understand Hashem. And this applies with Hashem's will and Hashem's wisdom. There's no searching. A person can't search for Hashem's understanding. No person can understand the wisdom of Hashem. If you search for Hashem, will you find it? My thoughts are not like your thoughts, Hashem is saying to human beings in the name of Yeshaya. The same place where you find the greatness of Hashem, that's where you find His humility. Now, what that literally means on a simple level means that when we mention Hashem's greatness, we also mention Hashem's humility. But what it also means, according to the Kabbalists, is just like we say that Hashem is infinite and unlimited, and Hashem has no restrictions, we also need to say, because of Hashem's infinity and because of Hashem's limitless, that Hashem is also limited. It's not a flex to just say Hashem is infinite, because of course that's true. What's also true is that Hashem could make Himself limited as well. So when we have a physical Torah and mitzvahs, saying that Hashem is connected infinitely with that is actually the greatest flex. Because we're not just saying that Hashem is infinite, we're also saying that Hashem can contain and restrain Himself into finite. How does it actually work? Okay, well, that we have no idea. Our brains cannot fathom that. Just as we can't understand Hashem's infinity, we can't understand how Hashem could possibly constrain and restrain Himself within the finity of Torah and mitzvahs. But we also know that it's true, that Hashem is also limited, because Hashem lets Himself be limited within the confines of the physical applications of Torah and applications of mitzvahs. Continues the Alter Rebbe, and Hashem restricted, compressed His will. Hashem took His will and His wisdom into the 613 Torah mitzvahs and their laws, and with and the letter combinations in Torah and Nevi'im, Hashem took His wisdom and His will and actually restricted it and contained it within Torah, which means, on the one hand, is it restricted and contained and that are fully understandable within the confines of this world? Absolutely. On the other hand, is it still infinite? Yes. How does it make sense? Our brains can't understand, and that's fine. And Hashem's wisdom and will is also contained in the Agadas and the Midrashim. Now, every single person, using his garments of his soul with his body, is able to understand Torah. You open up Torah like we're doing right now, and you're learning Torah, and you're connecting with physical brain, physical understanding, physical logic. Everything makes perfect sense. At the same time, enmeshed in it, enveloped in it, is unlimited energy of Hashem. And a person's able to fulfill the Torah and mitzvahs using the garments of the Sova, and thereby, by a person doing Torah and doing mitzvahs, they're able to clothe the 10 faculties of their soul in the 3 garments. And because of this massive dichotomy, this idea of Torah being absolutely infinite, connected with God, at the same time being downloaded into this physical world and being able to be connected by the garments of the soul, that's the reason why Torah is compared to water. Just as water comes from a high level and goes to a low level, you have the same water at the top of a waterfall and the bottom of the waterfall, and it's the same water. Yet when the water's at the top of the waterfall, you say it's miles up in the air, and when it falls down the waterfall, it's so much lower, but it's the same water. So too the Torah comes from a high, lofty, elevated place in Shemayim, which is the will and wisdom of Hashem, and Hashem and His Torah are absolutely bound, and no person can understand the Torah. And from that place and high in the world, it comes on a journey. It goes through this chain-like effect that Hashem creates in order to create the world. It travels along that until this Torah and these mitzvahs actually come down into the physical plane of this world. Most of these laws are all physical laws, and the Torah connects them are talking about physical things, and it's really it's physical. Everything's physical. Mitzvahs, tefillin, Shabbos candles, Hanukkah candles. These are all physical things in this world that are absolutely corporal and physical, and at the same time, its original source, like water, the top of the waterfall, is absolutely bound and connected with Hashem, and it remains that way as it travels downwards. And then you have the actual Torah itself, which is physical parchment and physical letters with ink, and the 24 books of the Torah, Nevi'im and Kislev, they're all absolute godliness. At the same time, it's like water traveling down from the highest world down to this world. The Torah went through this great descent. Why? So that human being can connect with it. Hashem did this incredible favor. Hashem embedded His will and wisdom into the Torah mitzvahs and enabled it then to travel down into this physical world that we're able to connect to it. So in summary, what are we saying so far in today's Tanya? We're continuing the topic of garments, but now it takes a massive twist. In yesterday's topic, it sounded like garments were almost an insignificant part of the journey of the godly soul. Turns out in today's Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is making us appreciate the garments are everything. The garments are far higher and far more in touch with godliness than even the very soul itself, because Torah and mitzvahs goes on a massive journey, but at the same time, and able to be enmeshed in this world, embedded in this world at the same time. What is Torah and mitzvahs essentially? The will and wisdom of God as it is absolutely united with God. Hashem creates this massive paradox that energy is somehow able to make itself inside this world, but at the same time, the Torah and mitzvahs are far greater than the soul. It's absolutely bound with God like nothing else in this world exists. And what enables a person to be in touch with that energy? The garments of the soul. So the garments of the soul are in tune and in touch with godliness that's far beyond the pale of even the soul itself. Thank you so much for joining the Tanya. The Tanya is Leila Nishmas, Faival Eliezer ben Yamin Levi, Moshe ben Aaron ben Akayim ben Yosef, Reuven ben Emmanuel, Aaron ben Avram, Esther ben Master Moshe, Menachem Yitzchak ben David, Shimon ben Tais, Tzibah Shon, Reza El Korach, Hasai ben David, Menachem ben Gdayan, Eliyahu Moshe ben Avram, Sarmiyam Bas, Chaim ben Yamin, Chaya Mushka Bas, Shimon Avram, and Fusham for Yaakov ben Aaron ben Lat Talat Kadosh Mas Chaim Shurach ben Yaakov Moshe ben Esther ben Nachman ben Eino Leibas Yana, Moshe ben Minos Yehuda Leiben Manya Yosef ben Shonasar, Yeshua Bekar for Yehuda ben Rivka, and anyone else in these Yeshua's, the successful the Jews on the world, especially the soldiers who defend the Jewish people in the speedy coming Mashiach, and a wonderful and very successful day. Thanks so much for joining.